joining. So as you know, we had the Intacct update the past weekend. So a couple of things that were introduced in this update. And I'll step through a number of these just today to give an idea of what's available, and then in some instances how to activate or start utilizing some of the new features and functions as well. So a few things that I sort of highlighted that caught my attention, specifically in region and then globally that we've got available now. So we'll step through financials, looking at some of these updates there. So there's a few things to change. So taxes on the AR discounts that we've got available. When we do our statement runs, there's some changes and new options to run statements as well on the AR side. And then on the AP perspective, there's a few changes. So firstly, on the reporting side, I'll talk about the new payment IDs for advances that they've added in there. And I think I'll mention one or two other things in there while we get there. On the cash management side, there is the option now to combine some of the transaction details, either on the bank side or Intacct side. So we'll talk about that, just allow that easier matching to go through. And then from the GL side, it becomes apparent that, sometimes people want to look at what the effect would be. So there's now the ability to include unposted GL transactions. So, if something's in a draft mode or haven't been approved or things like that. So we'll step through that. On the fixed asset side, just a quick one on that. We obviously have a number of customers on Asset Accountant. Initially, we had Sage Fixed Assets, so SIG as we call them. They have released SFAM now. It's been around a while. We've got a few customers on that already, and there's been constant change or enhancements on this product as well. So I'll step through a couple of those just to give you a bit of an idea of what that looks like and what we've got within the fixed asset module within Intacct. And then within R3, I think it was, we did have that equity consolidation that we spoke about. This is now generally available. So, it was an early adopter in our region. It is generally available. So it is there. It can be utilized. And that's if you're on the advanced consolidations module as well. So, we'll talk about that again, and I'll give you some examples. And if it's something that is of interest to you, let us know, and we can assist you getting onto that module as well. On the contract side, there's a few changes. So I think generally around historic take-ons. So, we've got contracts that's already in motion when we start the process, when we start on Intacct. So we can bring a lot of that history in as historic details, and that assists us with the renewal process as well. So there's a bit of enhancement there. It's not I want to almost say one-by-one renewal of the contracts. There's a bulk process that they've added to the into the process map, where things will automatically renew on those due dates. A few things on the administration side, so just general updates around there. We've got our sandbox naming updates, so they do give you the ability to now rename your sandboxes. So if you do have a sandbox, we can now specify what that looks like. And then on that new import service, there's also a couple of updates. So as we discussed previously, it gives you that ability to bring in files, do error handling initially on screen before we actually run that through the process. So it just enhances that experience. And they've added a few options there as well as to what we can import going forward. From an API perspective, there's a new look and feel for developers. So I'll sort of touch on that. Don't want to spend too much time there. It is a bit technical. I think the important one there, obviously REST API has been around for a while already, but XML is still supported. So they won't take that out at this stage. However, any new objects and features will be in REST only. So they won't keep developing on the XML side. From an API perspective, it's all around REST going forward. The last little section, just a few things around AI and automation that's been updated. So we spoke about the email options and the domain that's basically being changed. So we'll touch on that again and what that means. We do have that line level matching on the POs that's now available in early adopters. So initially, when you have that AP automation available, we could link that to purchase orders as well. So that line level matching is now early adopters, so we can apply for that if you want to start utilizing that matching features as well from Intacct perspective. Righty. Okay, with that, I'll jump into the product as well. So I've got a couple of slides. I think if you've seen one of these before, I'll talk about a few of the slides and then we'll go into the product, just have a look at where things are and what it looks like as well. So the first one, AR terms discount. So initially this was not available in region, especially because we've got GST running. So they didn't include this on the setup of the AR terms. Now that they've expanded this a little bit on the AR side, so we've got that going. I would expect AP will come through as well. But at this stage, yes, you can see there we've got a couple of new options on the AR term that we can set up to include or exclude GST as part of that calculation. So that's the main one. And essentially, if we start looking at what that entices, going to accounts receivable in our setup, if we set up our terms, that's essentially where we can go in on any of the terms. You'll see some additional options now here at the bottom where we can actually go in and do the calculation and specify if we need to include GST in there or not. So that's part of that process. There's a couple of things to note when we put this in. Firstly, maybe just an example. So if you look at that, there's 3%, so you can see what it looks like. So it'll calculate that and process it excluding GST in this instance. The same if it's included as well. So a couple of examples there as to what will happen when it gets calculated. But just things to note that's quite important if we bring this in or activate this. So it is only on, I would say, fully paid transactions. So if it's a partial payment or a credit, that won't be applied there. And also only on accrual basis. So if you're running a cash-based system, that won't work. We do need the accrual-based system active on that. All right. And it can only be on the discount side. So if we include penalties, that won't be available yet. So this is the sort of first release into it. Obviously, going forward, there might be some additional things happening, including the penalties, moving into AP as well. So a few things to look forward to. I think in this instance, probably just the initial one, see how it goes, and we'll roll out the rest going forward. On the next one is really around just AR and what we can include in there. So it's basically just specifying if we want to show all of our transactions or just the open item. So basically, allowing to easily reconcile back to, what is our outstanding balance. It's consisting of these open items, invoices, credits that's not been applied, or if you want to include all of those payments. So, your normal process when printing statements within the entity side, I'll go into print or email statements. When you run that process, default will have open items, but you can also see they show all transactions, or we want to actually only show the open AR invoices and credits, or only the open invoices. So you've got that flexibility to, just exclude some of those completed transactions. So if we don't want visibility of that across the application then. On the AP side, a few things on the AP ledger report. So that's the sort of first part, just to bring you some more flexibility on filtering options and reducing the time spent to preparing these reports manually. So if we want to look at specific suppliers, specific supplier groups, what does that look like when you start the process? So there's a couple of enhancements there. So if you look at our AP ledger report, we now have this vendor selection available. So and I think there's a few areas where that's come apparent where it's been added. But in this case, if we look at that AP ledger, and again, these are things that gets driven from customer suggestions. We want to be able to filter better on some of our reports. Now, as we said, I can now select a supply group. You can create a group, existing group, or find a new one and just run for that group. Or I can do multiple selections there to say, I want to include, there's my one supplier, or I want to do a range there for a few of them. So you can add multiple lists in there to say, yep, these are the ranges that I want to include. And when I look at that won't work. I'll add that in there and you can see. So when we run this, it will now include all of those selections that you've got there. So giving you that ability to just, filter what we want to see when we run these reports. And again, if it's something that's useful, this will be extended to other areas within the application as well. It's just to make sure that, the option is there on these current reports and we can start using them. And for these that I've shown you so far, as you saw there, there's nothing to change from a configuration or user rights perspective. It's there, it's available. It's just been added to the screen. You can select it on the runtime of the report or when you run it, if you want to include things or exclude things on those as well. The next thing on AP is really just looking at this auto-generated payment IDs. So what that means is when we do advances, initially it didn't have a sequence number option there. So basically it creates the advance. It will now show you the payment advance. So I'll show you now what to do, but essentially configure and set up a new sequence number, assign it to the advances. And then once we create an advance on the AP side, it will start generating the number. On the reports going forward, you'll see there's a couple of things there. So on the advanced list, it'll be the payment ID that you'll see. In some of the AP ledger, check register, AP aging reports, it will sit under the bill number or document number. So just to understand where it comes from. Initially, those advances would probably be blank at this stage if you run them. But as soon as we start assigning the number, you can now easily, get that in and then start automatically generating the sequence number in there as well. So looking at what that means, if we create an advance, you'll see there's a few that we've done that's obviously older ones, and there's the new number coming in. When we create an advance within the AP side, you'll see there the payment ID is new, so that will be generated automatically as part of the process. To complete that, firstly, we'll need to create a sequence. So within the configuration, if you go down to your sequencing, get there. Yeah, there's a document sequencing. You'll see there is now an advanced one as well. So essentially you can drop down, create a new sequence there for advances, and then, save that in there. So whenever we start then generating new ones, that will be created or assigned as part of that transaction process that we've got there. Now, a few things also added on the payment or on the AP side. When we start paying invoices, I think one of the improvements that we sort of requested is larger volumes. So I think there were a limit on the number of invoices that can be selected from a payment perspective. They have increased that now, so that's gone up quite dramatically as to what it was. You can also see some of the others there. So initially we can select more invoices there. There's a simplified and streamlined drill down for the credits. So clicking on that, it'll show you what those credits would be when we apply or auto apply credits as part of the payment. And then there's additional sorting capabilities that they've also added. So once you start adding in or doing your payment run, essentially, the sorting capabilities would be enhanced, and you can actually, find documents easier if it's not just based on due dates. There's some exciting things coming on this area further as well. I'll talk about that a bit later, but just so you know, these are the ones that we currently have in there. And then sticking to AP for a little bit more, there were a couple of additional things around matching. So once we start and set up purchase order matching, so, around your purchase order versus your invoice that's coming in. So once we have those matching tolerances, then we can set them up. Things that will come into play, it will trigger an exception firstly, so there's an additional exception summary that comes out, but on that transaction level you can see what that exception summary looks like. So we can see what our quantity variance and percentage would be, as well as our price variance and percentage. I think initially we had some of the percentage available. Sometimes the 5.3217% change doesn't make sense. So they have increased that or added the actual price variance just for visibility, making that process a bit easier to visualize. In addition to that, once we start, looking at these match tolerances and what we can get out of it, firstly, this state there, you'll see there on a receiver or transaction, there will be an exception marked against that transaction. So you'll have that visibility. If you click on that, you'll see the summary we just saw. But part of this would enable you to also trigger some smart events in this instance. So, again, just some of the logic there, we create a new smart event. So on the object where we say that's the purchase order transaction, if my state is, equal to exception. So when there's a matching tolerance registered and we create the exception, we can then trigger something. So what happens in the smart event? I want to email someone to say there's a variance, or I want to, log that into a report or something. So those smart events can be utilized a lot better, more efficient, to bring through some visibility around these tolerances as well. Okay, so quite an exciting way to just get those things up and available throughout. Now, on the cash management side, one of the enhancements that they brought there is really around reconciliation, making that matching process a lot easier. So when we look at that, it's all around minimizing the manual reconciliations that we need to do. And then we can allow or account for fees that's not covered, as part of our normal process. So to get that active, basically on your cash management in the bank recon rules that we set up, we can now incorporate some of the other amounts in there. So what that means is, on the amount field, you can see this was one of my matching rules. So when I look at this particular matching rule, we can say with the posting date, the document number is the same. But instead of just matching the amount from the bank side to the Intacct side, I can actually say I want to incorporate a combined amount. So it could be, a credit that we receive in there, or a debit that we receive, but there was a bank charge or a merchant fee deducted as well. So we can incorporate the debits and credits and match that back to the one amount that we received actually on the Intacct side. So, it makes that process easier. We don't have those separated lines, and I can do it on both sides. So you can see there, I can also combine it on the Intacct side to make sure that we can match the appropriate, lines together. So quite a nice enhancement just to make that process a lot easier from a matching perspective and setting that automation up. So there's an example of what it looks like. So, the bank statement amount was 97, but in Intacct, there's a $3 credit merchant fee, as well as the actual sales revenue credit that came in. So it'll actually deduct that, and we can then match the two transactions on one. And the same on the NFP side, handled probably a little bit different, but the same result in a sense, just making sure that we set it up the correct way so we can actually match that and bring that in. Okay, so quite a nice little way to enhance that bank recon experience. On our GL reporting side, so a few things there, and as I mentioned initially, this is around visibility. So we've got our GL reports that we can run. There might be some transaction posted or entered but not posted yet, and this gives you that flexibility to actually start looking at these, incorporating these, look at what it could look like at the end of the day or end of the month, for instance, and incorporate what that does. So I'll show you where it is, but basically there's a few, I think I missed one there, few options, as to what transactions I include. I only want to look at my posted. That's the default one, because everything that's posted is available on report. But now I can look at the unposted only, or both of them as well. And then looking at the different statuses, I could have draft documents. There could be, and approvals enabled, what happened there, but basically if it's submitted, partially approved, or declined. So there's a few options there as to which ones we can add as part of that one. Now with that, you'll see when we look at the report itself, you'll get that status field now updated. So you'll see what it is. So there's a draft one, there's partially approved, there's a submitted one. So you'll have visibility of these are transactions that are now included in the report, but they aren't posted in the general ledger. So essentially what that means is when we start looking at these, I'll look at my journal report, for instance, and running these in, you'll see there's this sort of new section there, include these transactions. So posted transactions only, or posted and unposted. So, both of these will have a selection box to decide which of these transactions do we want to include in conjunction with our posted. So with this filter, if I select that, I want to look at all my draft transactions, my submitted and partially approved. If it's declined, it might not come in, so we don't worry about that. Or, I want to look at things that were declined as to why they were declined. It should have gone through. So you can start, getting some visibility around transactions on GL that's not made it as a posted document yet. Now, a few important things just on this as well. So that visibility, and I think the important one there, the green sort of highlight, could be red, I suppose, but it will only look at GL transactions. So, if you've got a subledger, AP invoice, for instance, that's not going to pick it up as an unposted transaction on the GL side. It's only GL journals, basically. So anything that's created there as a draft or, into the approval workflow, submitted, declined, partially approved, those transactions can appear. Subledger transactions doesn't form part of the GL yet, as it hasn't been posted physically. All right. So just a bit of a caveat there as to what we've got available and how you can use that. Now, the next one is really just a little bit around fixed assets. So the new fixed asset module that we've got, SFAM as we call it. Now, some of the enhancements that they brought in, so it is quite useful because it brings in, additional dimension option into the application, where we can say now we've got a fixed asset dimension. So once we create the asset, it's a dimension, and we can, attribute other costs in there. Looking at, depreciation, anything that we do, it will be on that fixed asset dimension process. Now, the important one that they added in, we can basically dispose of an asset partially. So initially, when this was added, you can only dispose a full asset. Now you can do partial disposal, and then this depreciation would also then be affected. So you can see, in this method, there was a straight line associated because there were a partial disposal. End of September, I suppose. Looking at October, November, you can see the amounts have actually dropped down because the amount of the asset is now less, the cost of the assets. Okay, it gives you that flexibility, do a partial disposal, and then affect, subsequent transactions based on that as well. In addition to that, this is quite a neat little feature. When we, create that AP invoice, for instance, we can now split the asset as well. So it gives you some flexibility, and maybe just a quick way on what that looks like. So when we start processing that through, I create an invoice, put it to computer equipment, my normal process there. But on the details section, you can see there in my fixed asset side, I can create my normal asset record, or I can create multiple assets to say, what, I want to create 4 assets with a particular name, and you can actually process that through. So I don't have to separate that out, create multiple sort of expense lines that we want to capitalize. It's one invoice, one line that we put in, but there's multiple details, multiple laptops in this instance that we do. And ultimately, the idea behind that is once you process and post that, in this case, 10 assets, it'll create 10 assets in the asset register for us. You still have the ability to go back to those assets and then add serial numbers and things like that in there, but it creates the process, or makes that process a lot easier, where we say, one invoice, create the number of assets for us, and it can actually distribute that out. One of the other things there as well, you saw there on screen, skip the asset creation. So in the same breath, if there's a reason that you don't want to create an asset from this side, you can actually skip that as well. And again, these features will only be active if we actually utilize the SFAM module as part of this one. When we do the take-on for this, before we get to take-on, first editing. So one of the things that happened initially on this module, you could only change dimensions on there when you do a transfer of the asset. So in a sense, it might not be relevant to just transfer it somewhere else to create this. In this instance, we can now edit these dimensions. So I can change the department, location, some of those fields we can actually update, and just make the dimensional process correct instead of doing an actual transaction there. Okay, so a few things coming in there. And then also on this one, there was a bit around historical accumulation. So, when we bring in history as part of this one, so when we do the take on, do we want the system to automatically calculate the historical accumulated depreciation, or do we want to enter it manually? So we can decide what it looks like. So we know what you've got in your old system. We want to bring that in. We want to force that in, or we want to leave it in and say, this is my current value. I want the system to calculate what my historic value should be based on the rules that we set up. So some options there to just easily switch between the two and allow the system to automate some of these things for you as well. On The GL side, I would say GL side, but it's more around consolidation. So again, just to reiterate, with our consolidation, there's a few modules available or a few options, variants. We've got our normal domestic consolidation that we can do. We've got, which is basically if you've got all of your entities in the same currency, we can do consolidation elimination on that domestic level. You've got the global consolidation where it's multi-currency enabled. So I've got entities in the US, Australia, New Zealand. So it's different base currencies for each of those entities. We can do a global consolidation, bringing that together into a single reporting or consolidated currency. But we also have this advanced ownership. So on this particular one, they've included some, the equity method of the advanced ownership to bring in. Now, what that means is when we bring it in, you can see on the little diagram there, I've got entity 401, 30% of that is owned by entity 400. And then, what's that? 40% is owned by entity 200. And then subsequently, entity 100 owns a couple of other entities. Once we set up that structure, the process or the way the transactions will roll up, you can see that in 401, we had a total net income of $100,000. When we consolidate, so that first level into 400, it'll take 30%. So basically 30% of that 100,000 will go in there and attribute or add that to the net income of that particular entity. So in total, we've got 230 there. When that rolls up into the entity 100 consolidation, 40% of the total 230 will go into there and it be added to that net income in there. So it just shows you what that equity method does. It'll basically take the percentage of ownership and roll that up into the appropriate entities, but gives you the flexibility to say, I've got multiple entities that's got a share in a particular entity as well. So, a few little options there that you can actually set up and do that multi-level consolidation as well as part of that process. I think I did show you what that process looks like, but you can physically, or maybe I'll quickly just highlight on that. When we look at the consolidation piece, in our ownership structure, we can set up multiple structures based on the period as well. So these could change depending on where we are. So in my example, I'll have a few different ownership structures. So if I look at my structure period, per period, that equity or that ownership percentage could change as well. So you can see there's January, there's July. And if I look at the map for either of them, it'll basically show you what it looks like. So there's a couple of entities there, and you can see, there I've got a 90% and 10% ownership goes directly there. So depending on what your structure looks like, that could be different across the years as well. So if we go back, what was that, January 2019, I think it was. So if I apply that one, there was a different ownership structure and we didn't have 10% there, at the top. So a few things allowing you to change and what that roll up could look like as part of the process. Okay. On the contract side, so that's the next one that I just want to touch on. This was all around historical details that comes in. So you can see there's a whole section there around historical details. So it's contracts that we've got in place that's been around for a while. So when we take it on, it's not a new contract we start, but we've got some history on there. So it just brings that visibility in. It enhances the ability to allow you to do renewals or automated renewals as part of the process. And as we said, that renewal process is also enhanced where there's now a bulk engine available to actually handle that renewal process. It's not a contract by contract or contract line process that we bring into place as well. So these are just a couple of the things that we enhanced on that side. I mentioned on the admin side, there's a few things that we've done. So we do have the ability to now rename the sandboxes to something more relevant. So initially a couple of caveats obviously in there as well. So the naming convention, it will basically still have the prefix of your production company. So if you call microchannel, it'll still have microchannel dash, and then you've got 19 custom characters that you can put in there. Okay. So 40 characters is the limit that we've got there. That's include that dash in there as well. So there's the example test company. So by default, the suggested name would have been test company dash sandbox. but you can now do that custom text that you see there. So anything there will be available, and it's basically the suffix that can be updated if you choose to. Maybe a couple of other points just to mention there. Some of you might have used the Intacct collaboration tool already. If you haven't, start looking at that. It's quite a unique little tool where we can collaborate on transaction master data. Anything that you want to comment on things like that, add additional documentation there, add links in there. So it's quite a nice little tool, the collaboration. They have changed that now. So they are incorporating, instead of Intacct Collaborate, it's now Sage Collaborate. So they've expanded that, they've evolved that a bit more. So that section is coming. Now, what that means, any new customers, so probably no one on this call, would actually have the Sage Collaborate now going forward after the weekend. However, from November, so they have started the migration process. So what it means is they will in time just update any of the Intacct collaborations to the Sage Collaborate. Essentially the same tool, but just the evolution and some updates on that particular tool. So a few things to come out there, and options to look out for. And then also, as I mentioned, on the import service, so maybe just a couple of things. The import service itself, there's some options there to look at. The errors are shown in the spreadsheet, and it's basically there to understand what those errors are. We can easily find and replace values on the document as well, so we don't have to actually go back into Excel and do that. Once we upload that file into our import service, you can do things on the fly there as well. And then, if you've got any of those, what we call calculated columns in the spreadsheet, you can still leave that in there. You can effectively skip those as well as part of the import. So there's a few things that you can do with a new import service. So definitely, if you haven't explored that yet, it is something worthwhile. So generally, if you look at that, I'll quickly show you where it is. Again, company. And when we go to our import data, you'll have your normal import templates as we had in each of those sections. But within that new import service, if we open that up, you'll see there would be some additional options there that's now available. But also, those methods where we bring in the file, we update those in there, and you can do that error checking automatically as part of that one. I actually haven't opened mine initially for that perspective, so it does load a little bit longer. Just to give an idea of what it looks like. I'll just wait for that to finish. But ultimately, you can see there's the import service. Now, there's companies, WIP management, fixed assets. On the GL side, you can see there, it's all around master data initially, but now our GL journal entries is available. So there is a beta, so a testing option there that you can start utilizing. But ultimately, I want to create that. And again, we import the file. You can then do some verification on this side and look at if there's any errors, anything that we need to do, and then you can actually process that through as well. So, quite a nice little utility to start utilizing from that perspective. On the subject of the sandbox, just so that you know around the implementation and copy automation. So when we start implementation for any of you, they haven't really enforced the close down of that implementation folder. So you'll have an implementation folder and your production folder created. Essentially, the idea would have been to disable or deactivate that implementation after you've gone live. And then if you want to opt into a sandbox, you can do that as a subscription. But basically, just so that you know, once that creation has started, there's about 365 days total that they will have available for you to utilize that one, and then it will be dismantled. So basically, once you go live, you've got a bit of time in there, but they will also give you that sort of 30-day notice as well as to when they're going to deactivate that. So be sure of we get everything across that we need to. If you want to take that implementation into Sandbox, that is available, so they can indeed copy that across, so you won't lose everything. But once it gets to that deactivation, it's something that won't be recoverable at that stage. So initially it will just be blocked. Then you've got about 30 days to ask questions or maybe reactivate it for a little bit. But after that 30 days, it will be deactivated and then it's physically gone. Okay, so just take a note of that one as to how to plan around those as well. Now, when we look at the API, so that's one of the more technical sides of the business. So any integration that we do or you do into the application, a few things that you can do with the REST API, introducing a couple of other triggers, things that can be done that wasn't available on the XML side. So definitely a bit of enhancement there. Part of this process also looking at, what's that new look and feel look like. So there's my REST API reference. So what that means is for any of my modules, if I look at general ledger, it will basically open up all my options around the general ledger. So you can see there, it's basically a drop down, but accounts, account allocations, categories, groups. There's my journal entries. So what can we do in journal entries? I can create journal entries or look at the lines. But if I go to journal entries, it'll give you the idea of what's the API calls my get clause if I want to list my journal entries or delete them or update them. There's the get again or post them. So if I want to create a journal entry, what does that look like? So just some tools available so you can see there's the full details as to what needs to be presented within the creation script for API to run. Again, so it is there. Don't want to spend time on a technical one. It's probably above what I can do in any case. But those are there. So for the techies out there, again, fully documented, but just updated what we can see from an API perspective. As I mentioned initially as well, that XML API is still supported, so that won't disappear. It will stay there. We'll carry on with that. Any new enhancement that gets done or released, any new objects, that will all be done on REST only. So XML won't be updated anymore. It is there, it's supported, but no additional features will be added or new objects will be created there. So just take note of that one. If you still have some of the older XML, the APIs used, and you want to explore the new ones, talk to us. Absolutely, we can look at converting that across. Maybe enabling a couple of new features that we can with the REST side as well. Okay. Now, some of the more exciting buzzwords these days is all around AI. So there's a few things, especially what they sort of spoke about in our conference as well in Barcelona. So there's quite a few things that Sage has already done on AI, and obviously bringing in some additional ones. So going forward, there's quite a few things to look forward to, and it's all around boosting efficiency. So what can we do to enhance the user experience on this side, and not necessarily replace people, but how can we make the day-to-day job easier so that they can spend their time and more value adding into the business. Okay, so that's the drive behind AI, and it's all around trust. So that's the main focus. Any AI, yes, it's there, Copilot, ChatGPT, everything is out there, but it's all about trust. All of that's not available, and there's a bit of education that needs to go around all of this when you start incorporating that. So from a Sage perspective, we need to look at a few things now. Things that's already there, we do have the help with Copilot, so that's in Sage at this stage. So you can ask normal questions, normal language questions, natural language, and that generative AI would then produce an answer there for you. So that's already there, and that's going to be increased significantly with financial agents that's going to come in as well. So that part of the agent, I want to look at my debtors book and tell me about my debtors, top 10 customers, or what's my average days to pay, or things like that. So that enhancement is coming as well. So it is currently in early adopted in the US, so in other regions. So once that's available, it will come into our region as well. So those type of things is there to incorporate a lot more agents around to ensure that we can essentially then start utilizing that within the application and drive that efficiency. Okay, so the help is there. I think just the initial one, if you haven't seen that before, in your normal help, there is that search help, and you can effectively start asking that natural language questions. I was still in something there. It should allow you to open. Mine is, I think it's because I'm in the new instance there, but that Copilot help is available. I might do it from one other one, just want to see if it opens. There we go. Um, so that Copilot help is there. You can start, asking normal questions, and that's where that financial agent will also sit across to start incorporating the questions that you add there to actually start interrogating data within your system. So it's not just generic helpful information at the end of the day. It will then go in and interpret that, give you suggestions on how to increase efficiency around the financial side of things. So that's quite an important one that they're bringing in as part of that help. Now, around the AI and automation, so a few things we did speak about the AP domain that's going to change. So effectively, what that means is in Feb 2026, all companies will transition to this automatically. So that basically means, I think at this stage it's at sage.com, but now they will change that domain to at ai.sage.com. So the actual domain will change as to what that email looks like when we can actually send that through the AP automation side. Now, any of the new customers starting up on AP automation will automatically be directed to the new domain, so you wouldn't really know a difference. Anyone currently using that, if you wait till Feb, you will be updated. If you want to start utilizing it immediately, we can log a case at that stage or at this stage, and we can convert you across to that domain as well. Okay, so that's quite exciting change because it gives you a couple of more capabilities. So there's auto forwarding rules that will come into play with these things. There's new file formats that will be supported or are supported, should rather say. So in this, generally at this stage, if we do AP automation, you'll have a PDF or a JPEG or something attached to an email, and that's what the system will read. It'll look at that attachment. It'll start doing things and bringing that in. With the new file formats, you can actually, have the attachment in the body of the email or actually have the detail in the body of the email, and it can still read that. It can also if you take a picture of something on a smartphone, so that HEIC file format, HEC format, can now be interpreted as well as part of this AI domain. So a lot of options there to bring that in. And going forward, it'll just keep enhancing as well. And then part of that one is also that line level matching. So keep in mind, I did mention that line level matching, early adopter there. So if you want to start that automation process with line level matching, we can apply for that early adopter as well through the release notes. One other thing, currently, as you would know, for the customers that does use AP automation, you'll have, your instance name, so microchannel@sage.com or whatever the email is. Going forward, there will be options, so it's not there yet, but they are looking at introducing, a relevant name because, if you want to share that to your customers, that company name doesn't always make sense to them, or the folder name, company ID. There will be some options to actually change that, anything in front of that @ sign. So, again, exciting things to come. Now, when we look at the AI agent, so there's a couple of things already in place, and then obviously going forward, there'll be a couple of things coming in. So we've got now a number of agents already running. And part of this continuous accounting, we've got that AP agent. So that's all around the AP automation, the functionality that we've got there, and that's been running for a while. So that's available. It is in session, in country, in region, and we can utilize that. We do have the time agent. So that assists with intelligent time. So looking at your calendar, looking at emails, when you actually do time cards as part of the projects module, you can actually bring in those or create those timesheet entries based on things from your Outlook calendar or from emails in there. So how much time did I spend in this meeting? We can actually assign that to the project. So all of the project meetings or tasks associated to a project can then be added. So that's quite a nice little one there. We've got the continuous assurance. So that one's not currently in region. It is general available in the US. We'll have early adopter quite soon. So we're expecting that in. So that's what we call continuous close. So instead of having, some process in place or checklist, the system will drive that process where it actually prompts you with guidance for the team for every step of the way. So, there's a couple of AP invoices that you've got in the system that's been submitted. It's not been approved. For you to able to close the period, these needs to be posted or approved, to get through the process. So All of those type of things are part of the close process. So a couple of dashboards and prompts that will come through as part of that process. Our assurance agent, that's already available. So that's the one that's your outlier detection, basically. So that is that continuous assurance that keeps running. It keeps checking, what changes in the business. If there's anything that we need to incorporate as part of these changes, what that needs to look like. So that's there. We'll keep growing and enhancing as we go along. And then the continuous insight. So that's the exciting one. So you can see the financials coming 26, Feb 26. Now that's not quite one for us in region yet. We expect that later in the year. But that's basically the one where we said, the Copilot help is there already, but that will give you that financial insight. So, the exciting things, we can start interrogating our database. So it's not looking at, the micro-channel one in a sense. So I won't be able to see yours, but in your instance, you'll have an agent that you can actually interrogate and talk to. That'll actually give you financial insights from your particular instance as well. So quite an exciting one coming from that side. Now, one of the other things that's quite important to sort of understand there as well is from a development point of view and where AI is going, there's a few things that's available. So we've got our normal, what we call the Sage AI Gateway. And part of that is, yes, we've got REST APIs that goes into our gateway, but we also have these MCP service that's basically utilized to start or where the agents are running and accumulating the information that we need to bring in. So that's on the one side, that's what Sage would provide. But for partners like us, they will also provide the Sage AI Agent Builder. And that's the interesting one. So going forward, things that we've seen that is available, it takes it a bit further. So, there could be marketplace agents that will be available, or, we can do through Copilot, we can do other experiences. So examples that we had there is looking at your AP automation process that's currently there from an invoice automation point of view. You get the email coming in, the system reads it, it creates it as far as possible. It could go through approval process, but all of that is now getting automated. It's in the system. What happens next? That payment side of things. So we can basically create an agent looking at your criteria. So there's a couple of things that we can prompt the system. I want to pay invoices based on due date. So everything due up until today, I want to pay. For a range of vendors, for a payment method, all my BPay suppliers, I want to pay them. So those agents we can create as part of this developer side, and then automate what we can do via that. So it basically creates the payment file automatically, and maybe you just have an approval at the end of the day. So quite a nice few things to look out for, especially on the AI side of things. So hopefully that give you a bit of insight. They've been around, they've been doing it for a while. The good thing is it's been in the market for a while. The financial agent has been running, so a couple of months already. So that's there. It's being rolled out in other regions, and we will expect that soon, as I mentioned, early next year or midway through next year. I think is sort of the time frame that we earmarking at this stage. Again, we dependent on when it is actually released, but that's sort of the general idea. A couple of exciting things around AI coming as well.